Right, hi everyone. Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, I keep losing my mouse with this. So I'm currently the UK head of global cloud platform services for Experian consumer services. I have a number of job titles, none of them really make any sense. I'm also a blockchain consultant, but who isn't? I'm a yoga teacher, mountain biker, and motorbiker, and there's some contact details and stuff there. So I'm going to talk about compliance in the cloud, compliance in AWS. I'm going to talk about why you should be compliant, why it's necessary. I'm going to talk about what compliance actually is. We're going to look at some of the tools and technologies we can use to establish compliance, manage and maintain and demonstrate compliance. And then we're going to look at what our end state looks like. What does it look like when we're done? So who is this talk for? So who is anyone from Equifax here? I don't think so. Good, excellent. We can carry on. So if you work for a larger firm, an older firm, a firm that is organised by function rather than value stream, if you experience slow change for whatever reason, whether it's complexity or other organisational effects, if you're particularly risk averse, or if you're regulated, heavily regulated, then this should have some takeaways for you. I'm going to try and deliver this talk in such a way that you actually come away with at least one or two things that you can try and do back when you're at work. So why should we be compliant? Why can't we just build cool stuff? Why can't we just make stuff and make money and have fun and go home and ride motorbikes and enjoy ourselves? So there's three primary reasons for this in my mind. There's, first of all, actually being secure. We can't run a business without securing our platforms, managing our security, not letting the bad guys in, and not losing data. And we need to know what's going on. We need to be reliable and functional. So we need to do the thing. We need to make it work. There's also liability. We don't want to be fined and we don't want to go to jail, so we should try and comply with regulations. We should try and comply with whatever frameworks we're told to comply with by the business. And finally, there's a competitive advantage that you gain through being compliant. If you can demonstrate a higher degree of compliance or a higher percentage of compliance with more frameworks, more regulations than your competitors, your customers are more likely to trust you versus your competitor. You're a safer bet for your customers to come to. What is compliance, though? What are the actual compliance rules? So I'm going to do some more hands-up-y things. So first of all, we've got Sarbanes-Oxley. Anyone have to abide by Sarbanes-Oxley stuff here? Cool, so we've got a few. So that's all the stuff from the Enron scandal, so you can blame fraudulent guys in America for that one. Then we've got HIPAA. Anyone have to do HIPAA stuff? Oh, that's good, you lucky guys. So HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is basically healthcare stuff, clinical data, highly sensitive information. If you have to abide by HIPAA stuff, then you've got a lot of compliance work on your hands. FISMA, Data Protection Act, GDPR. Yeah. PCI, anyone do PCI? Yeah, so payment card industry, data security standards. That's not as hardcore as HIPAA, but it's still a bit of a toughie. Then you've got ISO, so you've got these are more voluntary ones. These are voluntary for the business, might not be voluntary for you guys. And Cyber Essentials, which is like a cut down baby ISO. What is traditional compliance? And this is traditional compliance. This is This is stuff like SOPs, this is standard work instructions, security profiles, configuration rules, governance spreadsheets, meetings upon endless meetings, and audits. And most of you will be familiar with stuff like this. And the point I want to make here is that this is written by humans. It says, like, determine the adequacy of board and management oversight, blah, 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 blah. It is written by humans for other humans to read. So this is written by a human interpreting regulation for other humans to read, to interpret this into a way that they can affect and control their technology. So you've got like 2 or 3 different layers of interpretation before it gets to the technology itself that it's trying to control. So there's a lot of scope for error, a lot of manual work involved in traditional compliance. So my point is really you can't apply those traditional compliance practices to the public cloud and DevOps. It's a different environment. You've got a much higher pace of change. You've got different technologies, and you've got different risks. The questions that compliance people ask invariably don't apply. The questions that traditional compliance people ask invariably don't apply to public cloud. They don't make sense. The questions don't make sense. Questions like, where exactly is my server? Well, I can tell you it's in US East 1, but I can't tell you the address of it, and it's a good thing I can't tell you the address of it, because other people can't tell you the address of it. If I knew where it was, and someone else could tell you where it was. Things like, how big is your generator? How high above the floor is your raised floor? Stuff like this. I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. And when we're talking about traditional compliance, invariably the assumption, the perception, is that we're talking about a compromise between speed and risk. Speed of change and the risk of it going wrong. The perception is that a higher speed, a higher cadence, results in more errors, bigger errors. And so I wrote this in. I put this in the presentation, and then started to think about this and realised it's kind of wrong. The perception is true. The perception is that speed, a higher speed, will increase risk. But actually, as we've seen over the past couple of days, with decent DevOps practices, we increase our cadence. But we increase our cadence with smaller changes. We decrease the size of our work packages, decrease the size of our changes, and increase the cadence of those changes to mean that the risk per change is smaller. So actually, that's not true. What it actually is, I believe, is the size of the change that affects risk, which, from a traditional compliance standpoint, compliance teams wouldn't necessarily agree with that. The compliance teams would often want to bundle a load of changes together into a project or program and have a Gantt chart and meetings and project managers and deploy something every 6 months in one big controlled swoop. So before we move on to the next slide, who goes through audits? Who's been through at least one audit? Excellent. And so who goes through audits quite regularly? Right. So if you're an auditor and you run into a business and you audit, and everyone knows everyone expected you to come, so everyone's got everything ready and everything's nice and everything's documented, and you're at or near to 100% compliance. You do that every few months, and you come in, and every time you come in, it's 100% compliant, and you're very happy. In the meantime, once the auditors have left, what happens? Your patching schedules might drift. Your documentation gets a bit out of date. Other stuff becomes a bit non-compliant because you've been doing your actual day job. And your actual level of compliance has been drifting down a bit. But then suddenly there's another audit, and everyone has to drop everything, get back to 100% compliance, and the auditor sees 100% again. So what we're trying to do is turn the auditor's perception of reality into actual reality. We're actually trying to achieve 100% compliance all the time. So let's look at the common principles of compliance rules. So I've tried to group these into five things. So there's control of access to data. There's data lifecycle control. There's knowing your environment, knowing what's going on. Low-risk change, using low-risk change, and the prevention and recovery from incidents. And there's an underlying thing around all this, which is documentation and proving it. So in the first bit, control of access to data, you've got stuff like AAA security, CIA, protecting against internal, external, accidental or programmatic threats. In fact, I've just said some acronyms there that I don't like saying acronyms without making sure that I've explained them. So AAA security, does anyone want to give me a shout at what AAA security is? Trying to keep everyone awake after lunch. Okay, so no one wants to go. So authentication, authorization, and auditing. So in this case, you've got like, are you Bob? Is Bob allowed to do the thing? And did Bob do the thing? And when did he do it? That's AAA. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and the other one. That's the one. So yeah, and then we've got data lifecycle control. So this is where GDPR comes in significantly. So we've got, where's your data come from? Where is it residing? How does it behave? When is it archived? When is it deleted? Is it encrypted? And stuff like that. You've got knowing your environment. So auditing events, traceability, your configuration management system, knowing what you've got, what it's doing, when, and how. Then you've got low-risk change. That pretty much stands for itself. Standardized procedures, repeatable or automated procedures. And finally, disaster recovery, backup, business continuity, major incident management. And then documentation. And what's the cohesive thing around all this stuff is that this is the stuff we do anyway. This is the stuff that we would do even if we didn't need to be compliant. So I've tried to break compliance down into 3 pillars. The first one is achieving compliance. This is the stuff that we do anyway. This is the technical stuff. This is making sure that our stuff is backed up. This is making sure our stuff is encrypted. And it's technical. This is the stuff that we like, because we're techies. We can make the stuff. We can tick the boxes. We can code it and make it happen. Then the next phase is evidencing it, documentation. And this is the stuff that is just dull and no one wants to do. And we know that if we were left on our own and build our own systems, we would probably never do any of this stuff. But we know we should. And then you've got maintenance. You've got maintaining that compliance. This is the really hard one because this is cultural. This is making sure that people actually do maintain the systems, keep things patched, keep the documentation up to date, not just write a document, but keep it up to date. And this is translatable, if you like, as a roadmap to continuous compliance. What we're trying to do here, because this is the hardest one, evidencing is somewhat hard, and the achievement, the technical bit, is the easiest one. So let's shift everything left. Let's shift everything over to the technical side. Shift maintenance and evidencing it into the technical side. So we're talking about compliance as code. Has everyone seen Office Space, right? Oh, I hope so. This is the guy from Office Space, and he reminds me horribly of a compliance guy that I used to work with. So some concerns that have been raised to me about using the cloud. First of all, we can't use AWS, we can't use Dropbox, it's not secure. What I mean is that there's a confusion between infrastructure as a service and software as a service. And, and this is the problem with the term cloud that's been bandied about because it means different things to different people. My point there is you've got to be clear about what you're doing. compliance teams might say, or traditional compliance teams might say, we need our own hardware. Well, no, we really, really don't. It's not 1996. We don't need our own hardware. I'd rather have someone else's hardware. It's their problem. AWS don't abide by our change control process. Well, no, they don't. And around 6 months ago, maybe a bit more, when we're all getting emails from AWS saying, this instance is going to be restarted overnight at this time, and we didn't know at the time that they were patching against Spectre, and all the machines were getting rebooted. But yeah, sometimes we'll just get a notification from AWS that a thing is changing, this thing is being deprecated, or this instance needs to be rebooted. So that's to some degree valid. I don't have time to learn all this new stuff. Well, we all have to learn new stuff. Let's wait until company X. Let's wait until so-and-so have done this already. We don't want to be the first to do something. Well, that doesn't sound like the way to get a competitive edge to me. So we can ignore that one. And what if we need to move to Azure? My point here is about vendor lock-in. And this is raised all the time about public cloud. Using AWS or using Azure, or whatever you're using, there's a huge advantage gained from using native services, using Lambda, using AWS recognition, or something like that. And by doing so, you're locking yourself into that particular service to a degree. And yeah, it would be great if we could code all our stuff, we could build our platforms to build our systems to be completely platform agnostic. But it would cost a lot. We'd lose a lot of efficiency, and it would be really difficult to do. So there's a compromise there. We've got to use the services that make most sense, while to some degree being aware that we might at some point want to move over to Azure or a different platform. But when someone asks that question, how often does, in the traditional world, and when we were back in data centers, how often would you entirely move all your stuff from one data center to another? We put all our stuff in rack space or somewhere, and no one says, well, what if we need to move out of rack space? Well, we're going to lift everything up and shift everything, and that hardly ever happened. So it's a rare occurrence. So how can we respond to these concerns? First one this is like Exhibit A. Who's familiar with this, the AWS shared responsibility model? Okay, so this is essential to know if you operate in the cloud. The point here is that AWS are responsible for security of the cloud. They're responsible for the compute, storage, database, networking, their regions, their infrastructure, their edge locations. So they're responsible for power, compute, cooling, security, physical security, and stuff like that. So that means that's taken out of scope for us, because AWS are handling that. What we're responsible for is the blue bit above. So we're responsible for customer data, platforms, applications, firewall configs. AWS will provide the firewall, they'll provide the functionality, but we're responsible for making sure we set it up right. So this is something to provide to your compliance teams as, this is what you need to understand. Exhibit B is this. So that stuff that we were just looking at, that stuff in yellow, all adheres to these standards, ISO standards, PCI DSS, SOC controls, and which means that not only is that yellow stuff taken out of scope for you, but you know it's already PCI DSS compliant, you know you don't have to worry about it. If you want to achieve compliance, AWS have that handled, that layer handled. What's important to note here is something that happened to me a year or two back was a finance team outsourced the production of a little software package that was delivered by a local software firm, and they built it in AWS, and they showed this to the finance team once they'd built this package and said, oh yeah, this software package is PCI compliant because of this. Not understanding that just AWS being PCI compliant doesn't mean everything you build on it is PCI compliant. That's a pretty bad situation to be in. So my point is, compliance teams, particularly traditional compliance teams, they've been in their compliance stream their whole lives. They're not used to DevOps and the cloud and continuous integration, continuous delivery, higher cadence and stuff like that. This is all new stuff to them. This is magic. This has turned up over a very short time in their careers. They don't know what is going on. They used to be able to walk into a data center and audit it every 6 months, and they're really uncomfortable with the fact that AWS don't let them in and have a look. So really, comfort your compliance teams, bring them on the DevOps ride, explain to them how AWS works, maybe send them on some courses, but they need to understand that it's not magic, it's just a slightly different way of doing things. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to bake in compliance. We're trying to bake in compliance and draw it over to the left. We're going to try and make the evidencing and maintaining compliance a technical task, an automated technical task. That is this is my belief, a standard operating procedure essentially is a Python script for humans. A well-documented, well-written standard operating procedure should be largely automatable. Something like this. So this is one rule that you might have in a standard operating procedure. All users' IAM accounts must use multi-factor authentication. And that might be in a standard operating procedure. How do you know that that's been enforced? Well, if we turn it into code, then we know it's enforced. This is an example of an AWS config rule. And you can see if MFA is enabled, then it's compliant. If not, then it flags as non-compliant. So what we're trying to do here is turn anything in an SAP into code. So what technologies and tools can we use to establish and maintain compliance? Let's have a look. Right. So first one, I've tried to break these into sections. So we've got accounts, users, people, and permissions. Principle here is that one person should have one account. Try and use single sign-on, because once you've got a sprawl of accounts, a sprawl of user accounts, it's going to get really messy. Don't log into your root account. I'm not going to get people to put their hands up as who uses their root account, but set up a login alert for root accounts, so you know when they've been used. They shouldn't be used. Use AWS organizations. Who uses AWS organizations? Few of you. Even if you've only got one AWS account, it's worth layering AWS organizations over the top, so you get better policy-based control of what you can use inside that account. For what it's worth, I think AWS Organizations is a great tool, but it's very much in beta. It looks like it's got huge power, but it's not. There's some hidden stuff going on in there. Key management. Rotate your keys using KMS or HSM or the new AWS Secrets Manager. If you're running Linux instances in your production environment, ask yourself the question, does anyone actually ever need to log into those things at all? If you're using immutable infrastructure in ephemeral instances and auto-scaling and stuff, why would anyone ever need to log into an instance? If no one ever needs to log in, or if you can build it so that no one ever needs to log in, then do what we do at Experian and strip out the key. So as soon as a box is fired up in production, no one can log in. There is no key for it. You can't get in. It's like the most compliant way of managing access to a box ever. Consider whether you want to use guardrails or hard control. So a guardrail might be telling your teams that you can use this particular set of AMIs or any AMI as long as it's patched, up to date, and hardened. Hard controls would be having an AMI baking pipeline that only delivers 1 or 2 or 3 AMIs to your dev teams, and they have to use those only. And that's probably a decision based upon how heavily regulated you are. Oh yes, CloudTrail. Who uses CloudTrail? Does everyone use CloudTrail? Do we all make sure it's enabled in all regions? Because the point is, and I've seen this a number of times, people enable CloudTrail in just the region they operate in, but then don't know if stuff is happening in the other regions. So enable CloudTrail across all the regions in your account, whether you use them or not, and you'll get flagged for anything going on in there. So knowing and controlling your environment. So what's going on, what's happening, and when, what exists, and what's it doing? So again, you're looking at AMI configuration, baking pipelines, and the most interesting tool in this presentation maybe, which is AWS config. Anyone use AWS config? Any hands? Not many. Config is awesome. Config enables you to define the rules that your compliance team set, such as everything must be encrypted at rest, everything must be encrypted in transit, and you can turn that into a rule. So we can say all volumes must be encrypted. Well, there's one that isn't. The rules available to you baked into config are here. There are currently 51, and they get added to all the time. You can define whether CloudTrail is enabled, whether EBS volumes are encrypted, whether security groups allow internet access, and whether you've got any S3 buckets open to the public. What you've got then is that you can then trigger specific actions based upon a rule. So, for example, if you had an AWS, if you've got config set up to look at your S3 buckets, and if it spots upon creation or in a scheduled scan that an S3 bucket is publicly enabled, it can shut it down. It could delete the bucket. It could flag it. It could send an email to someone. This is compliance in real time. So this is another step towards that 100% compliance. If the particular rule that you want isn't in the standard set of rules in AWS, take a look at this. This is the GitHub repo for config rules. And there are many, many rules in here. You can write your own, of course, but you can also pull some out of here and modify these. Any number of rules in here, from checking that RDS instances are not in a public subnet. S3 buckets have default encryption. Security groups do not have port range of all enabled. You can drag all these out and modify them for your purposes. In this stage, you're also looking at things like Systems Manager, OpsWorks, and lost my mouse again, and Trusted Advisor. Someone mentioned Trusted Advisor earlier, fantastic tool. Tagging strategies, and I think I've already got those somewhere up here. Tagging strategies. If you use tagging to good effect, you're going to make your compliance life a lot easier. This is really useful resource provided by AWS. Technical tags, tags for automation, business tags, and security tags. What this means is that you can tag your various resources with different compliance needs. So you might want to tag all your PCI resources with a compliance tag that says PCI, or another tag that might be PII, another tag might be health information. So you can apply different policies, different rules to those resources. Use Cost Explorer, use CloudWatch, and use CloudFormation. Really handy way to use CloudFormation for your compliance teams is to build your tools so you can readily export your diagrammatic infrastructure diagrams and stuff to your compliance teams, so at any point they can say, what does our infrastructure look like? And you can print off your diagram and show them. They really like that. Finally, protecting yourself from the bad guys. So you're looking at stuff like CloudWatch, Shield, AWS WAF, and other tools in there. So I'm going to move on to some third-party tools. So these are some tools that we use, or I have used. Inspec by Chef, which is kind of like AWS Config on steroids, an open source product, really useful for configuration management and compliance management. Evident.io has some really great tools in for compliance management and allows you to select different programs based upon PCI, HIPAA, and other regulatory requirements for your environment. Datadog, RapidSpike, Twistlog, Qualys, and SonarQube and Veracode, which are two code evaluation tools. SonarQube's really great at code quality, checking for bad code, mistakes, code smells, stuff like that. Veracode is a bit more security-based, and they have a bit of overlap, but you could definitely justify using both. So after that quick rush through some tools, so we're looking at trying to shift everything over this way. So by using things like AWS Config, by using CloudFormation, by using Inspec, and all the other tools available to us, we're trying to push everything that way, trying to turn our compliance into continuous compliance, compliance as code. Evidencing it, using CloudFormation, using config, alerts, CloudTrail, and maintaining it by pushing your maintenance over into the code side, into the left-hand side of your software development lifecycle. So the idea is this is what our end state should look like. Instead of that almost sine wave pattern of compliance, shifting everything into your technical state, in theory, should mean that you could maintain 100% compliance between your audits as well as at audit time. And a crucial thing to do here is to bring your compliance teams along for DevOps, educate them, allow them to learn with you, because they don't understand what's going on. They don't necessarily understand infrastructure as code, immutable architecture, stuff like that. They've been doing this for years. So shift left, compliance as code. So you've got continuous documentation, continuous auditing, and continuous compliance. Good, that works. So all the resources I've shown in this presentation are at that bit.ly link. There's a page on my website with this presentation, some of these tools, all those links, and more. So hit that up, and still with the presentation, do it at your will, give it to your own teams, whatever. That's it. So, and if you need to get in touch with me, if you want to shout at me for anything, that's where I am. I'm going to put the link back up on stage there so you can write that down. That's me. Thanks very much.